Paul Peterson. Paul received his doctorate at the University of Chicago, where he was then on the faculty, then became Director of Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution, and then Professor of Government at Harvard University, where he is to this day. While there, he had a number of students, including yours truly, Pat Wolf. He has many of his intellectual children who have dispersed throughout academia and the education policy world. And so for you graduate students in our program here, you should see yourself as Paul Peterson's intellectual grandchildren, not to make you feel older, but you know, the idea is that ideas spread from generation to generation, and that having students has an impact on those students, and they have impact on their students, and that's all part of the wonderful process that we're in academia. And so you should also know that not only does Paul have many intellectual children and now intellectual grandchildren, but he has actual children and grandchildren, which are spreading as well, which is also very exciting. And that both types of children and grandchildren are having a big impact on the world, and so that's something to be excited about as well. Today, Paul is going to talk to us about his forthcoming book, which is not out yet, right?
End of this month.
End of this month, but is it available on Amazon?
Not yet.
Not yet, but it will be soon. And we look forward to hearing about this forthcoming book. Thanks.
Okay, so I thought I'd talk about two things with you. One is where we've been, and two is where we're going. Sort of make it rather encompassing. And yeah, I had to have an excuse to put this up there. So this is you know, what's the education going to be like for grandson Jack, and how will this educational system that we have today be transformed? But before talking about that, I want to begin with how we got to where we are. And the basic argument that the book makes is that we started off with a very decentralized, locally controlled system that the Scots brought with them to this country, and it was adopted and spread in this land more quickly, more rapidly than in England, although it had great influence on the English educational system as well. And this very decentralized, locally controlled system proved to be extremely powerful, so that the United States became the most powerful generator of human capital of any country in the world, somewhere in the late 19th, early 20th century. And we are, even to this very day, living off the fruits of that tremendous capacity of the American education system to create an educated population. But gradually over time, we have moved our schools away from communities to more centralized institutions. It begins in the 19th century, and it takes place over a very long period of time. And I'm just going to highlight some of the characters and some of the events that are part of this long story. So let me begin with Horace Mann. Horace Mann was a missionary-minded reformer. He did not like the orthodoxy that he was born into, became a Unitarian, and he wanted to stamp out the orthodox instruction that he saw was taking place in Massachusetts schools, and he wanted to make sure that the schools enlightened the immigrants coming from Europe who were Irish and Italians and Catholic. So he created statewide institutions that instructed teachers in enlightened philosophy and gathered statistics on how well the system was adapting to the ideals that he had. It was interesting that when he went to Europe to learn about a good educational system, he did not go to Scotland. Instead, he went to Prussia. The Prussians had figured out how to create a centralized educational system. We'll have questions, so I'll just let you hold. Unless you, this is Horace Mann. Okay. So the Prussians created a uniform educational system for the Germanic people, which they saw as essential for creating a unified country, worried about the other major European powers that were a threat to their political situation. And so Mann thought that was the idea that would work in this country as well. But he was not so much worried about foreign powers as he was about the large number of immigrants that were coming into the country. He didn't succeed. He basically doesn't succeed. He gets some things going, but the basic story of the 19th century is that power remains at the local level, in the hands of local politicians, in rural communities and in big cities. There's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of patronage. There's a lot of inefficiency, but the system nonetheless remains under local hands, and the communities start competing with one another to prove that they've got as good an educational system as the next community. And the building of the American high school is a story of each little town proving that this town was the best town in the area because they had a high school. And then their neighbors built a high school as well. So whereas the Europeans took a long time to build their secondary educational system because they had to agree upon this as a nation, the United States never agreed on secondary education. They just sort of did it, school by school, place by place. Along comes John Dewey, the progressives, at the end of the 19th century. And John Dewey created the laboratory school at the University of Chicago, great school. My children went there. I was the president of the board of pre-collegiate education, which oversaw that school when I was at the University of Chicago. It has very talented people, and it really wanted to introduce the concept that education needs to be customized to each child. That was Dewey's vision, and it was picked up by his followers, and it was this very powerful progressive movement that's had a huge impact on our country's educational system. But Dewey's followers said the only way that we can do this is to centralize power, to get more control over that educational system, because these community elites that are controlling it are not going to allow the introduction of the ideas that the progressives were committed to. So they created bigger school districts. We have a decline in the number of school districts in this country from 120,000 in the early part of the 20th century to 14,000 by the end of it, 120,000 down to 14,000. We have an increase in the size of the school. The little red schoolhouse disappears. School boards become smaller. Professional administrators take over. The state laws affecting and giving direction to the educational system are elaborated. Teachers have to be certified in order to teach. All of this was designed to keep the politicians out of education and to give the control over the schools to the professionals, but at the same time it was centralizing control. So to customize education, you had to centralize power. It took the progressives a very long time to have an impact. This did not happen overnight. It really comes together not until after World War II, when a lot of money comes into education, the baby boomers arrive on the scene, the country is ready for a transformation of its education. The progressive movement culminates in the transformation of the school that takes place in the late 1940s, 1950s. And then along comes the civil rights movement, which threatens to undo a lot of what the progressives had in mind, including a challenge to the power of the professional. Now, Martin Luther King is a true hero. I'm forgetting to show you. I came across this picture of John Dewey. It's so different from any other picture of him. I just thought I had to show that to you. He's going to a convention of socialists in 1932 in Cincinnati, I think, at the time this picture is taken. And here's Martin Luther King, a familiar picture. And the interesting thing about Martin Luther King is that his focus was on the schools and desegregating the schools, but his impact on society was vastly greater in all other domains. We get the legislation that opens up public accommodations to African Americans. We get transformation of the entertainment industry, businesses, access to jobs, employment, to higher education, to so many elements in our society, politics, sports. But the schools that we have today are as segregated as they were in 1975. Yes, we have had desegregation within school districts, but we've had such migration to areas outside the central city that the overall degree of segregation has remained essentially the same for the last 40 years. So Martin Luther King's impact on our school system has been much less dramatic than his impact on our society as a whole, unless you want to consider his impact on the concept of rights, which gets picked up by many other groups in the society. The politically outspoken, this is the people in Alaska who are saying that they, I don't know what a bong hit is, but probably do. And so anyhow, is this indeed something that you should be able to do on a school ground or not? So the rights of free speech, the right of due process has had a huge impact on what a teacher's sense of their authority in the school. It's had a legalization of the way in which our public schools operate that's totally different from what had pre-existed. And it's not at all clear that it's been for the best, especially for those who are disadvantaged students. So you've had legalization, increasing control by the courts. You've had the rights of the disabled. When my son was born back in 1970, before PL 42-192 was the other way around, 192-42, the law that's now called IDEA, in the Disability Act, it was not clear that he was going to be able to go to public school because he was autistic. And many states did not admit students to school who were autistic. So by the time he was of school age, that had changed, and we were able to have David go to school in a specialized program throughout his lifetime. So I'm hardly criticizing the passage of this legislation and the extension of rights to the disabled. But at the same time, it has had a dramatic impact on the functioning of our schools, because with the mainstreaming of the disabled and the placement of many disabled people within our classrooms, along with all of the rights that students now have, it has created a vastly more challenging situation for teachers and created a situation in the classroom that has challenged our schools. So you have had that rights movement, and then you've had the rights movement for teachers, the unionization of teachers. If you go back to where we were in 1917, where the police went on strike in Boston, and Calvin Coolidge was governor of the state of Massachusetts, he said that no one who went out on strike would ever work for the state of Massachusetts as a police officer again. And they didn't. He broke the strike, and these fellows lost their jobs. So that had a dramatic impact on people's concept of whether or not the public sector could bargain collectively and could threaten to go out on strike. And even Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who did more to promote the union cause than any other president of the United States, took a firm position against any public sector collective bargaining, saying the only person that can make laws is an elected representative of the people. And that elected representative can't make deals with any particular group in the society. They have to do it in a constitutional process. So that was his firm opinion. It was the opinion held by George Meany, who was the head of the AFL-CIO down through the 1950s. And it wasn't until 1960 that John Kennedy issued an executive order which said, yes, you could have collective bargaining in the federal sector, and that idea gets picked up elsewhere. And the key figure in education, and even more generally than education, is Albert Shanker, who tells Mayor Wagner, the son of the Senator Mayor Wagner, whose Wagner Act was passed back in the 1930s, which created the National Labor Relations Board. His son is mayor, and he tells Albert Shanker, no, you can't go on strike. If you go on strike, we're going to fire all the teachers who go out on strike with you. So Shanker says, we're doing it anyhow. And he goes out on strike on the very day that Kennedy defeats Nixon for president. And he's urged not to do that by the Democratic Party because it is thought that perhaps this election is going to be very close. It was very close. Any little thing could tip the balance the other way. Shanker went ahead anyhow. And he won a tremendous victory. He got a huge increase for the teachers, salary increase for the teachers in New York. The idea spread across the country, and we have had collective bargaining in many of our school districts. Most of our school districts are something equivalent, nearly equivalent to it in nearly all of them ever since. So we've had rights of the politically outspoken, rights of the disabled, rights for teachers, and all of this has required more bureaucratic control, more centralization, more regulation, more removal of the classroom from the community in which it's embedded to another set of institutions and orientations in the society. Well, that's sort of where we are today. And I think where we are today is a very stagnant educational system. I think you all know that our test score performance of our 17-year-olds hasn't improved in the last 40 years. You know that our performance in math and science is well below the international average. We no longer look like the best educational system in the world. We look like an educational system that has lost the dynamism that it once had. And so where are we going from here? Are we stuck? Are we at this point unable to make any kinds of changes? Well, you look at the school choice movement that's been out there and the accountability movement that's been out there. And let's talk about the accountability movement in particular. Let's put, I'm going to skip over this here if I can. Well, let me just do this one just before we get to accountability, because it is sort of fun. Because this is the salaries for teachers relative to the salaries that other workers get. And the green line is what an ordinary average person in the workforce is paid annually. And the yellow line is what teachers are paid. And the red line is what college-educated people are paid. So it used to be that those things clustered together down here, and the teachers were doing just about as well as anybody else who was college educated. But there has been a separation of these two lines with the passage of time. So one of the great ironies of the collective bargaining movement was that it got a lot of benefits for teachers, but it didn't improve their salaries relative to other college-educated people. And the reason why that was the case is that the cost of education has been climbing very rapidly in recent times. So we pay now 3.5 times as much in real dollar terms as we did back in 1960. And so part of that is just because we have a lot more professional people in education today relative to the number of students. About twice as many as in 1960. And it's not just professionals. If you look at the non-professionals, the bus drivers and the crossing guards and the secretarial staff and the maintenance staff, that too has doubled relative to the number of students over the past 40-some years. So we have been becoming a more labor-intensive educational system. As we have become more centralized, we have become more labor-intensive in a society that has become more capital-intensive. The standard example is the farmer who can now feed thousands instead of just the family feeding itself, working in the fields and taking care of itself. But now the farmer is an incredibly productive worker. Well, that's because of this tremendous amount of capital that has gone into the agricultural sector and into the manufacturing sector and the service sector, Walmart being the classic example there. What has happened in education has been exactly the opposite. It takes more people to deliver the same product, and the product isn't getting any better as a result. We've been stagnant in terms of how much kids are learning in school. So that's where we are. And then the accountability movement came along, and Bill Bennett became sort of a semi-spokesman for this. Accountability to me is the absolute apotheosis of centralization. Once you've decided that the teacher cannot be trusted to teach kids in the classroom in the way that they once did, and they were given a lot of autonomy, but you had to have all these centralized institutions created to control their behavior, whether it was court orders or state laws or bureaucrats or collective bargaining agreements that adjudicated their relationships with their employer. And once you put all of that on there, how do you get the teacher to really care about whether that student is learning? Well, people became suspicious of the teacher, and so they said, look, we've got to put on an accountability regime. And it goes on from one state to another and finally culminates in No Child Left Behind, which we have generally now come to see as not held the promise that some thought it would have. So, but it certainly has centralized education. The pressures for centralization are more intense and more pervasive than ever before. So I think that all of these trends have taken place, no matter which political party has been in power. There's been all kinds of forces that work from one direction or another, but the end result is we don't have anything like the educational system that we once had. So where are we going? Are we going to keep going in this direction? Is this the inevitable trend line into the future? It's possible. But then there's Julie Young. And Julie Young is the head of the Florida Virtual School. And let me tell you about Florida Virtual for a bit, and then tell you my thoughts as to why her story is important. She's a very ordinary person. She grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, in a middle-class home, got her BA degree from the University of Kentucky in elementary education. She was head of a Greek sorority, just a member of a Greek sorority, but at a time when feminism was making this not a very cachet thing to do. She's a sports fan. I think I can play this on her cell phone for you. So if you're visiting with her, you will hear the UK fight song. she runs her school, Florida Virtual, like a Silicon Valley startup. She's got everybody reading this book, The Magic of Teamwork, which was written by one of the vice presidents of the Magic basketball team in Orlando, Florida, because Florida Virtual is in Orlando. So she has everybody reading this book on the magic of teamwork, because she says that's the only way we can create a great school, is for everybody to work together. So she has a very antithetical attitude towards the traditional bureaucratic structure that is so much a part of our educational system. And she's a progressive. She is a true successor of John Dewey. Her motto is, students can learn at any time, any place, any path, any pace. Any time, any place, any path, any pace. She tells her teachers, guys, we're about teaching kids, not teaching content. They all learn differently, and we adjust our content to our kids. Now, you can't get more progressive than that. That is a progressive philosophy. They even teach physical education online at Florida Virtual. The great state of Florida has deemed it necessary to compel every high school student to take one term of physical education, thinking that somehow that's going to slim them down and so forth. But there's a lot of kids in Florida who just hate those smelly locker rooms and changing clothes and all that stuff that goes with physical education in a brick and mortar school. So they are taking this course online. Well, what do? They go to Wellville, the little town of Wellville, as they call it on their description of their program, and then you report your height and your weight and your pulse and your exercise plan and what you're eating and so forth. And some kids have lost 40 to 80 pounds after taking this course. I have been told by Julie Young. I'm signing up for the course this coming term. We don't have a very good randomized field trial to find out whether or not the kids taking this course are actually healthier at the end as compared to those in other Florida schools. So I'm not going to campaign for FIED online, but it is fascinating how she has created a whole potpourri of courses, from Latin and chemistry and trigonometry to very ordinary courses. And enrollments at this school are growing rapidly. They had 100,000 a couple of years ago. They're at 200,000 today. They had only about 5,000 back in the early 2002. And the reason they're growing so rapidly is that any student can take as many courses from Florida Virtual as they want while still maintaining enrollment in their local district school. And the money that is given to the local district school is reduced by every course that they take online. So you now have, let's say you take 2 courses online and you take the other 10 courses from your district school. Well, then 2/12 of the money is going to go to Florida Virtual, 10/12 is going to go to your local school. So Florida Virtual is getting new students. It's the amount of money that's coming in, its revenue flow is rising very rapidly. The other districts are getting very suspicious of this school. They've tried to cut its budget. They did cut its budget by 10%, which doesn't really cut them too much because they're a pretty efficient operating system. So with a continued growth, they're going to be able to overcome that. But the district schools haven't been able to shut it down because it's now built a constituency statewide, so that there are students throughout the entire state that are taking courses. The teachers are paid on the basis of how well they do. There's no union. The managers of the school can actually observe what the teacher is doing, emails that they have with the students, the lectures that they're giving, online, but a lot of the material is canned. A lot of the material is presented by programming that the curriculum specialists at the school have developed. And the teacher becomes more of a coach, helping the students with the material rather than actually presenting the material themselves. So what do I learn from Florida Virtual? Well, I learned that, first of all, young people are perfectly capable of learning online. This is not a problem for them. It would be a problem for me probably, but for them, it's a way of life to access information off the internet. And it's basically what's happening in higher education. So if it's happening in higher education, why isn't it going to come into our high schools and our middle schools as well? Right now, 20% of college students in the United States are taking at least one course online. Anybody here taking a course online? Oh, this is, elite institutions are way, way behind this. It's the community colleges, it's the junior colleges where this movement is taking off. And it's growing at the rate of 25% a year. So you have the costs of education are rising so rapidly, it's hard to imagine that we're going to be able to sustain a system of higher education today that's going to, in the future, that looks like anything like the one that we have today. So we're going to have a transformation of higher education such that a few people are going to be able to educate large numbers of individuals. And the same idea is going to translate into the high school and middle schools as well, as long as politics doesn't prevent it. And because all the vested interests are going to fight the development of virtual education, and they've succeeded in a number of states. But the pressures of technology are relentless. Politics can hold off technological change, but it really can't stop it. So what do I see as sort of the elements of this system that's, you got to say, okay, I don't believe you. I can hear this in the room. I just don't believe this. It's not going to change. So let me give you the story of the transistor radio. This is the first, not quite. There's a predecessor. This is a fairly advanced, tinny, junky transistor radio that existed back in the 1950s. When transistors first came out, RCA tried to introduce them as an alternative to the vacuum tube, and they failed. So they just sort of said, there's no way our customers are going to prefer these inadequate transistors over what you can get with a vacuum tube. So they kept on making vacuum tubes. But Sony said, you know what, we'll make these little pocket transistors and we'll sell these things to teenagers. The teenagers loved pocket radios, even though you couldn't hear much on them, because they could listen to their music, their time of day, with their friends, instead of having to do things with their parents. So this idea took off very rapidly, and Sony became very wealthy, and it started figuring out ways to improve transistors. And I can remember the night I was married, my college friends bought for me, it was my favorite wedding present. It was a transistor radio that was about this size, or a little bigger, about like that, and had much better quality than any transistor before that. Still wasn't very good. It was out of date within a year, but anyhow, we have transistors everywhere. RCA Victor is gone. Sony is everywhere. So that's the idea. We're in the transistor radio phase of virtual education today. But we are learning that you can produce online applications that are vastly beyond anything that has existed previously. And if it can happen in other areas, why can't it happen in curriculum? So I expect high school students will be creating their own curriculum. There'll be open source curriculum development. Peers will be educating peers. There'll be academic games. There'll be a mixture of content. And the main thing I worry about is accountability. I mean, how are we going to make sure that those who take online learning are actually learning? And that's where accountability comes back in. But this time we have to think about how we can set up an accountability regime that will work for students instead of trying to hold teachers accountable or schools accountable. We just have to make sure that students are learning what it is that we as a society want to learn. Well, if this idea does advance at the rate I expect it to, we are going to go back to something closer to the Scottish system at the beginning of the Republic than anything that we have today. We are going to have people making choices about how they want to learn, what they want to learn, where they want to learn. It's going to be in the control of the family rather than in the control of professionals. It will be a very dynamic, very fast-changing system. It could be as productive as the educational system we had in the past. That's my story. I'm open to questions. If you, how much time do we have?
We have time for questions.
Right. Yes.
Well, so you seem to suggest that there will be more autonomy and freedom by moving to this system, but I'm not exactly sure why that would be the case. Why wouldn't all the accountability regimes that we have just latch onto this immediately?
Well, you can learn it how you want to, and you can learn as much of it as you wish. I mean, one of the problems with accountability now is, are you proficient or not? I mean, there should be, if the AP course comes much closer to what you can imagine in the future, because you can learn AP courses at any level. But think about how you would learn your AP course. You could learn it in a wide variety of different ways rather than through some standard textbook that you have to take at the present time.
So I actually have taught an internet class at a university.
I didn't ask that question. How many people have taught? Oh, good. Good, good.
But that's not my question.
Right.
My question involves, suppose we do move in this kind of more individual specific education direction. One potential concern that I think we have to kind of grapple with is this possibility that this might end up reinforcing intergenerational transmission of human capital. And I was curious as to your ideas about ways to help to promote equality of educational opportunity in a environment in which perhaps there may be dramatic differences amongst parents in terms of the capital they impart on their kids.
Right. In the long run, I think this is a great egalitarian development, but in the short run, I think it will increase inequalities. Every new innovation from the transistor radio on has been first captured by the well-to-do, the best educated. The rich were the first to start smoking. They were the first to quit smoking. So they always do whatever is the latest thing first. And so it would be surprising. It is the case at Florida Virtual that the test scores of students on the statewide Florida exam are in the 70th and 80th percentile, way above the average test scores for the state of Florida as a whole. So we know either they're doing a fantastic job, or more likely, they're attracting a clientele that's relatively advantaged. So, yes, I think that's the way it's going to start. But just think about the fact that you won't have to live in a particular place to go to a good school. Right now, if you live in Wellesley, Massachusetts, where I live, or Potomac, Maryland, or Fairfax, Virginia, you will have a chance of being in a pretty good school. But if you don't live in such fancy communities, you don't have nearly as good a chance. So this levels that playing field. So that's why I'm sort of optimistic about the long run. Yeah, Tom.
Well, you point back to Scotland as an example of a system that we're moving into. Any contemporary examples of countries that epitomize?
Any countries today that have moved in this direction? I can't give you a story about a country that has discovered the power of the internet. broadband. But then the United States has more of the infrastructure than any other country. And we have broadband in the way that most countries don't. And we have the technical capacity to build curriculum that other countries don't have. Right now, we have the capacity to build interesting curriculum material for the internet. And the big corporations have not moved in there, mainly because of scale. It takes a lot of upfront money to create interesting material that's going to be attractive to students and educative. And so the idea that the way you could advance this very quickly as a policy matter would be to create regional or national accrediting agencies that would say, okay, here is a course that is certified as being a good chemistry course or a good algebra course or whatever. And then if it was part of your race to the top legislation, you'd say, okay, if your state allows students to take their courses in this way, then you'd get state funded. So that would be a mechanism to get us to move to scale because we have huge advantages over other countries in terms of the infrastructure we have. So I think if it's going to come first, the United States has as good a chance as anybody. Yeah, Pat.
So the Florida Virtual School is an interesting anecdote, but my mentor in graduate school emphasized that you really only convince people with rigorous data-driven studies. So the two studies of education technology I'm most familiar with, the ETS study and the Mathematica randomized controlled trial, the randomized controlled trial is showing no impacts whatsoever of education technology on student learning. The ETS study showed negative impacts because students were just playing around on the internet instead of really engaging material. So doesn't that clash with your claims?
No, I think it's quite consistent with the idea that we are in the transistor radio stage. I mean, it is not the case that the best instruction in the classroom is worse than what's available on the internet today. But it is interesting that many studies are being done of virtual education are finding roughly comparable effects. And I wouldn't expect anything more than roughly comparable effects at the present time, given the quality of the infrastructure and the quality of the curriculum that's been developed so far. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in the Florida virtual schools, doesn't the funding come upon the student's successful completion of the course?
Yes.
So then would the accountability portion come in at what we define as successful completion of a course? I mean,
yes.
If it's a letter grade, then that's not very accountable. If it's a standardized test or some sort of growth model, then those would be, we would think, better assessments. So, I mean, it seems like the accountability would come in what we define as successful completion, right?
Well, I talked with Julie Young about this fact because I discovered when I was there that, in fact, they get paid for every student who completes the course. Now, that's a lot better than it is in ordinary high schools, where they get paid for everybody who signs up for a course at the beginning of the year, whether or not they finish or not. So the fact that they actually have to have that student complete the course in order to get paid has forced the Florida Virtual School to worry a lot about student completion. They have completion experts on staff to assist. Teachers are evaluated on how many students do you bring through to completion. I mean, you've got performance pay based on does a student complete the course. So, and completing the course is a good thing. I mean, we have to agree to that. However, you can complete this course if you get a D. So, you know, the standards are very low. And you also have to worry if the teachers are going to get paid on the basis of completion, how rigorously they are going to assess the quality of the work of the student. So I think that's the challenge. I think that's the biggest challenge. How can you make sure that virtual education, now with AP courses, they're okay because you have to have the AP exam, which is an independent exam. You go to a particular location. I said, why don't you do this with all your courses? And they said, the logistics are too enormous. But I think that's not quite right. I think that somehow policymakers that is the challenge for policymaking. How do we come up with an accountability system that, it's a general problem in American education as the whole accountability movement has talked about. I mean, how do you know if students are learning? How do you ensure that they're learning? And how do you hand out credits for a course based on what students have learned? So I don't think this is anything different from the more general problem, but it becomes more visible this way because there's such a distance between the teacher and the learner.
Where does Julie get her more effective teachers from? And related to that, Tom Smith's in the audience, or Eugene, so I'll put him on the spot, or put you on the spot, I guess. How could an enterprising college of education, I guess it's in our case education and health professions, make this kind of change, shape this kind of change in good ways, and work with it and use it to get better?
Well, how does she get them? She gets them from experienced teachers. She generally pays her teachers more than the going wage in Florida. I think she's paying them about at the going wage of the big cities in Florida, which are way above the statewide average. You can live anywhere in Florida and get this pretty good pay. So it's a good job. And it's a good job in another respect. You have no discipline problems. Or, your discipline problems are they don't get the work done. You call them up on the phone and you say, why didn't you do this, and so forth. So they have some, but it's not the typical ones.
Attendance takers and
right.
And stuff like
so
that.
It's a very attractive job. People, once they get this job, they hang on to this job. So it's, so they have people come, they apply, they put them through a very rigorous assessment before they hire them, and then they have a 1-week training program before they launch them. So it's an effort on their part to identify good teachers, but I think they're pretty proud of their teaching staff. Yeah.
Ken, I don't know much about the technology and the level of interaction that's necessary in these courses. Is this something that, technologically speaking, could easily be like pirated and duplicated? In which case you might have a complication in your business model.
Yeah. It's very transparent, right? It's up there on the screen. Somebody can see what you're doing and then figure out how to improve on it. So I suppose you can try to patent it.
But is it something that you're always closely interacting with your instructor in? Or is it, I can go download these clips and watch them and teach myself and then go take a test somewhere else? Which of the two is taking place in Florida?
Oh, at the currently?
Yeah. Is it
well, you got to
interactive, or is
register
it
for this
self-directed?
course, and you got to complete this course from them. You can't go learn the material elsewhere without going through the course with them. Right. Right. Jake.
I see two objections or two serious barriers to expansion of virtual schools. One is the problem of the physical custody of children. Children have to be somewhere, and some adult has to be responsible for them. And parents go to work, and they want someone to watch their children. And the law expects that there should be someone watching those children. And so with virtual school, you don't take care of physical custody. And so other than a limited population of homeschoolers out there, how exactly do you expand beyond that? That's one objection. The second objection actually I think is more serious, which is the political objection, which you wave aside by saying, well, politics can't stand in the way of technology, but actually I think it can. It's not as if technology is something that just happened in education. We've had technology in education for a long, long time, with very little effective use of it for a long time, which might explain the study's PAT sites. Remember, we have over 6 million people currently working for public schools out of a total working population of a little more than 100 million people. That's quite large. As you pointed out, they bargain with the people who are elected, and they help elect those people with whom they bargain. In the state of Arkansas, just to nail it home, we have a cap of 500 students in the entire state of Arkansas who can be virtually educated, which sounds nothing like Florida.
That's why I think the Florida model is interesting, because it allows students to take courses at school and over the internet at the same time. So it fills in gaps that the local district school doesn't provide. And that has been the way in which this thing is getting established. And I think there is this, it's got to be like the transistor radio. It's got to sneak up on the system. You can't do it frontally. So having this sort of choice between your district school and the virtual school is valuable. Now, the driving force, I think, is money. The cost, what do we have? Federal deficits, we have state deficits, we have local district deficits, how are we going to provide public services at a lower cost than we are today? Unless you come up with a technological solution to that, it's not going to be easy. You can't just sort of say, okay, we're going to cut teachers' salaries, we're going to increase class sizes, we're going to totally reverse all the things that we've been doing over the last 25 years. And yet, the American public is not going to agree to another 3 times increase in the amount we're paying for our educational system over the next 30 years. In my opinion, they're just not going to be willing to do that. And there's tremendous pressures right now. So if somebody comes along with another way of doing it, and technology is a way of doing it, this has a lot of appeal to members of the state legislature. And that has been the powerful argument in every place where virtual education is making progress. It's making progress by saying we can do it just as well or better for less.
I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. I see Bob had something here, and I don't know.
I can catch you later if somebody else does.
Okay, well, we'll Bob, go ahead, and then and
I just follow up on Tom's question from the beginning about the other countries. What do you say to the fact that so many of the European countries that exceed us in some of the international tests have highly centralized systems? Your narrative began with a fall from grace, which was right. Centralization.
Well, the Finns have done very well, and the Finns have improved enormously, and we don't really have a good answer for exactly why the Finns have done this. But we don't have the tradition of the king having a bureaucracy that reports to the king in an autonomous, independent public sector, which the French have been able to rely upon and the Germans have been able to rely upon. Their schools aren't all that great either, and they haven't made much progress in recent years. There are very few countries, the Canadians being one of them, who have shown definite progress in recent times. So I don't have a good answer as to why those systems have been able to solve the problem of centralization and effective education, but that's not been the experience in this country.
I think it's too much pressure to make someone have the last question, so we'll make that the last question.
Paul, do you know?
Take